Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time really explaining this particular chapter of this book or what I'm going to talk about. It's from a book called KillJoys by Christopher Snowden, who's a guy in the UK, a very smart guy who likes to discuss the merits of John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, and that's what this is all about. I'm just going to read it to you and you tell me what you think. Starting on page 56, chapter 6, Public Health, Paternalism. When Mill offered examples of illiberal laws in On Liberty, he focused mostly on religion. The Sabbatarian movement's campaign against Sunday recreations was then at the height of its success, and Mill condemned the Puritans' campaign to suppress, quote, all public and nearly all private amusements. But of all the, quote, gross usurpations upon the liberty of private life Mill identified in his own day, it was a prohibition of alcohol in the U.S. state of Maine and the UK Alliance's efforts to introduce the same law to Britain that drew as sharp as barbs. The alliance, whose full name was the United Kingdom Alliance for the Suppression of the Traffic of All Intoxicating Liquors, raised Mill's hackles by using a warped version of the harm principle to justify their attack on alcohol. A spokesman for the group claimed that other people's drinking violated his social rights because it impedes my right to free moral and intellectual development by surrounding my path with dangers and by weakening and demoralizing society. Mill called this a monstrous principle which, in practice, acknowledges no right to any freedom whatever, except perhaps to that of holding opinions in secret. Mill also criticized the use of licensing laws to restrict the availability of alcohol, a policy he believed was suited only to a state of society in which the laboring classes are avowedly treated as children and savages. He did not object to licensing laws per se, nor did he disapprove of taxing alcohol as a luxury. It was the paternalistic intent he found objectionable. Taxing drink and drugs with the specific aim of reducing demand was, he said, quote, a measure differing only in degree from their entire prohibition. In the 19th century, it was drinking, rather than smoking and obesity, that health paternalists focused their attention on, so Mill naturally wrote more about alcohol than he did about tobacco or food. The only mention of smoking in On Liberty comes when Mill lists activities that are so commonplace that they are under no threat of suppression. There's a little footnote here. He writes that a person may, without blame, either like or dislike rowing or smoking or music or athletic exercises or chess or cards or study, because both those who like each of these things and those who dislike them are too numerous to be put down. He was, of course, writing long before the health risks of cigarette smoking were adequately understood, indeed, long before cigarette smoking became popular. But nothing in On Liberty suggests that he would have applied different rules to tobacco than he did to alcohol or opium, which is to say that he would have opposed any paternalistic measure designed to deter its use. Aside from a few remnants of the Victorian age, such as Sunday trading laws, religion plays little part in British paternalism today. For the most part, blasphemy, cursing, and most forms of sexual deviancy are tolerated both in law and by society. Once viewed as fitting targets for government compulsion, these issues have become matters of private conscience. Attitudes towards health, meanwhile, have gone in the opposite direction. Several writers have commented on the similarities between the modern health movement and old-time religion, with their shared preoccupation with drugs, tobacco smoking, overeating, gluttony, consumption of alcohol, drinking of caffeine-containing beverages, and sexual license. Lifestyle decisions that were once regarded as private matters have become issues of public concern. It is under the banner of public health that paternalism breaks new ground. In Against Autonomy by Sarah Connolly, she notes approvingly that the field of public health has been one of the few to systemically suggest interventions in behavior. That's from her book in 2013. With the exception of her concerns about financial security, all of her examples involve smoking or obesity. In Why Nudge, Cass Sunstein's main examples of new, harder nudges are graphic warnings and retail display bans for tobacco products. In Julian Legrand's Julian Legrand in Bill's new book, Government Paternalism, the big idea is smoking licenses. The paternalist's gaze has turned decisively towards the health of individuals. The logic of public health. Although the public health lobby borrows ideas and rhetoric from both hard and soft paternalists, it is distinct from them by virtue of being a political movement rather than a philosophy. Public health paternalists are essentially a single-issue pressure group, a subset of ends paternalists who believe, as Sunstein notes, that longevity is what is most important. This puts them in the same bracket as Sarah Conley, even if, like Conley, they think of themselves as means paternalists, helping people to achieve goals that they have set for themselves. So an ends paternalist is a person that believes in not just coercion and subtly trying to change people's habits, but they actually believe in active banning and creating laws and just doing everything they can to stop people from doing things. The ends justify the means. Means paternalists think that you should maybe give people little ideas and information and make it something they think about when they engage in an activity that may be bad for them, but all in all, they don't believe in outright prohibition. Excuse me. Like Conley, they give short shrift to nudge paternalism, and for the same reason, Marteau et al., 2011, Bonnell et al., 2011, a report on public health ethics by the Newfield Council explains that in many instances, quote, libertarian paternalism is not suitable as it may allow too much choice. They are open to using nudge-style tactics, which is, like I said before, a nudge is actually something where you don't create a tax, but you give little kind of subtle hints. It's like an advertising thing. You nudge people in advertising. You give them little cues to make them think that they would be happy with a product or maybe unhappy when, in the case of paternalism and public policy, unhappy to use something, or there might be some bad, like if you put a picture of, diseased lungs in a pack of cigarettes. That's a nudge. They don't outlaw it, and they don't impede your ability to acquire the things that you're after to keep you satiated or happy or whatever it is that we do as human beings, but you sort of kind of deter the idea by offering alternative ideas or just, saying that this is a possible outcome if you were to engage in this activity. They are open to using nudge-style tactics in the first instance, but if they fail to bring about sufficient behavioral change, then, quote, a more invasive public policy may be needed. This is the Newfield Council. To illustrate the chasms between libertarian paternalists and public health paternalists, consider the Newfield Council's proposed nudge of banning cigarettes from sale unless they are non-addictive and do not cause harm to health. In effect, full prohibition. But with an exemption that would allow cigarettes to be sold, quote, only through channels such as mail ordering or similar, where more effort needs to be put into buying them. It is highly debatable whether this counts as a nudge, since Thaler and Sunstein explicitly state that if people want to smoke cigarettes, they will, quote, not force them to do otherwise, or even make things hard for them. They're into nudge paternalism. But this hardly matters, since the Newfield Council rejected the idea on the grounds that, quote, the possibility of opting out is too risky. In other words, if you permit consenting adults to buy cigarettes by mail order, some of them will do so. Oh, well, can't have that, can we? In their day-to-day political activities, public health paternalists rarely attempt to justify their position on ethical grounds, preferring instead to talk about evidence-based policy. This keeps the conversation on the consequentialist turf of, does it work, rather than opening up the question to, is it right? But their consequentialism is of a narrow sort. It is a policy. If a policy is believed to prolong life or curtail risky behavior, then it works. and becomes evidence-based per se. Other consequences are largely ignored, including the implications for people's welfare unless they directly affect health. Public health paternalism is quasi-utilitarian in the sense that it uses regulation to increase aggregate longevity and reduce aggregate health risks. If utilitarianism is about the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, then public health paternalism is about the greatest health for the greatest number. Gostin and Gostin, from their 2009, I'm not sure if it's a book, claim that public health paternalism is concerned primarily with overall societal welfare. It is not. It is concerned with one aspect of societal welfare, which the paternalist thinks is more important than other aspects. As Carl Phillips notes, it does not fit within any recognized framework of welfare economics and is a pseudo-ethic. A little chilly out here. It's a nice day, though. This is from a little excerpt from the book. It is not welfarist because the measure is not welfare, but merely one arbitrarily chosen component of welfare, reduction of disease. No one tries to defend this goal by claiming that if it were adopted as an ethic, it would make the world a better place. It clearly would not do so. It certainly does not reflect the empirical reality of how anyone chooses to live their life. So, there's another, this is a great book. I can't say enough, people should be reading this book because it really gives you the glimpse from what a public health advocate thinks about the world versus what an actual person thinks about the world. Like a real person, a person that engages in the world. And, you know, whether it be a reward or a guilty pleasure or whatever it is you do, these things bring us incremental amounts of pleasure that we see as a valid trade-off for our money that we earn from doing a job or whatever it is we do for money. Most people have jobs. That was the end of the excerpt. In an article advocating the prohibition of cigarettes, Grill and Voigt assert that more life is better and more freedom is not always better. As a short summary of the public health worldview, this double whammy of bald assertions is tough to beat. Both statements are plainly subjective judgments. Sorry, I'm getting a little... A libertarian might argue the exact opposite. Others would take the middle ground depending on circumstances. Contrary to Gostin and Gostin, there is no guarantee that efforts to improve the health of the population will improve social welfare. On the contrary, public health policies which raise the costs and reduce the benefits of people's first choice preferences are likely to damage their welfare and therefore damage the welfare of society as a whole. Policies which interfere in consumer choice to advance one component of welfare cannot be justified on utilitarian grounds, nor can they be justified on liberal grounds. Some public health policies can be defended on economic grounds, such as addressing negative externalities, even if their primary intention is to change behavior for paternalistic reasons. But public health paternalism cannot be justified by welfare economics or utilitarianism. It is simply a form of ends paternalism, in which health and longevity are assumed to be overriding goals. Public health versus public health. The case for government action on public health issues is strongest when there is a threat to health that can only be countered by collective action. Collective action does not necessarily mean government action, but if the term public health meant anything in Mill's day, it meant tackling health risks in the shared environment which cannot be controlled by the individual, such as air pollution or those involving people or animals who carry infectious diseases. Factories pumping coal smoke into a congested city and travelers coming home with Ebola pose a clear risk of unavoidable harm to others and are therefore a potential justification for coercion under the harm principle. It is not the scale of the risk nor the number of people affected that turns a health problem into a public health problem. It is the lack of consent from those who are put at risk and their inability to reduce the risk without collective action. Just for a second, I'd like to pause on that. The assumption there is that there's an infectious disease that's going to get out. And it's this kind of thing that you cannot stop, you cannot prepare for, you cannot do anything about because it's something beyond our control. It's like an act of God. But it's not true. It's not true that you can't prepare your body for an infectious disease. It's not true that you can't make your best efforts to improve your nutrition, improve your health, improve your exercise, stamina, lung capacity. All these things are possible. People have to want to do it. This is something, and there's no cure for old age, people. I mean, like, unfortunately, as we get older, it tends to be that we slow down. We stop moving so much. There are, of course, always exceptions, hashtag not all. But not only do we slow down, but in this world, the amount of toxicity in our environment now with, I'm not going to say it, but a new form of wireless radiation that's going to be like just flat out rolled out in society without really the consent of the governed. People are not being told what the possible health risks are on this. I've posted a couple of videos on my own page about this recently. All I can say is watch them. Everybody's all worried about the bees. Well, this thing that I'm talking about has been shown to mess with bees' ability to come home and find home base when it comes to supporting the hive. And so you have hive collapse. So that in and of itself is a good enough reason to say, hey, we should really be thinking about this. So why aren't we thinking about it? Why is there no public debate? Why does it seem like anybody that even questions the necessity for this new technology that's going to give us something we don't even need? By the way, this new technology, the only thing it could possibly be good for is surveillance. Massive amounts of surveillance. Nobody needs to download the amount of information that is going to be offered by this new technology. It's not about making your life better. It's not about movies. It's not about being able to, like, you can download a whole movie in a couple of seconds with this new technology, okay? Why? Can you watch a whole movie in a couple of seconds? What is the point of that exactly? I've heard people make arguments saying, oh, you can have 4 bars in one area and 3 bars in another area, 2 bars on one, and this is just going to be like a buffer or an additional layer of the technology availability that's going to make it so that nobody ever has to go without any signal disappearing at any point, anytime ever. And you know what? We lived for an awfully long time without having constant connection to the internet. I'm pretty sure we could handle it. We're talking about very serious potential health effects, and why isn't the debate being had? It just has to happen. It has to get rolled out. And why does it have to happen when the only real application is surveillance? I mean, you think about it. If somebody has a better argument to make than that, you tell me what it is, please. Now, where was I? Right. So, we need to have collective action for things like Ebola. Well, for Ebola, I would say that the collective action we would need to have is a isolate style, and you want to do some social distancing? I will social distance with somebody who has Ebola, okay? I'll stay the fuck away from that person. I don't want anywhere near somebody who has Ebola. I don't want them coming to the country, but generally it presents itself pretty quickly, so there doesn't seem to be any chance of that happening. A respiratory disease that kills, unfortunately, vulnerable people. What happened with this thing was it's got an incubation period of 2 weeks or more. A lot of people, probably most, are asymptomatic. People were working in homes. We did not act soon enough. We did not protect people in long-term care homes enough. But how would you have done it? We didn't have tests. How would you have identified the people that were sick so they can't go in and help the old people, the people that need to be helped with every aspect of their lives? These are people who they're not living a life, per se. I have to find a different thing to say than per se, but we just put my own mother in a home recently, and I can tell you, it's hideous walking around there, seeing the way some of these people in these old-term homes live. They get wheeled out in the morning, cleaned up, sat up, taken out of bed, probably dressed, taken to the bathroom. Everything is done for them. Is that living? Really? Is that living? Am I saying that that's every person that died from this and we should just forget about all of it because that is probably the majority of people who got infected? Why did they get infected? This is not complicated. These people need hands on them for every aspect of their lives. We had a long incubation period. People that were helping them were asymptomatic. It got into the homes, okay? Got into the homes. It's horrible. It's horrific that all those people died all at once instead of one a day, which is the way that it usually happens. I don't mean to sound morbid, but that's just kind of the reality of what happened there, and it's awful. But again, the numbers are not even outside of the norm, so I'm not sure why we're having this conversation where we need to shut down all society to stop something that is inevitable. You can't stop death, okay? Sorry. And there's a handful of people that have gotten sick. There's always random people that get sick. There's always random people that die from the flu, from various things. You never know. Kawasaki disease, come on. Come on. There's like between 2,000 and 5,000 cases of Kawasaki disease every single year in the United States, and a slightly smaller, it's Canada, we're 10% of that, so it's probably 10% of that. It's 200 to 500. The point is, if you get a handful of cases when we're having this perceived pandemic going on, it doesn't mean that because they were exposed to a virus that didn't hurt them, that had something to do with their present. They get sick anyways. A lot of it has to do with toxicity. I don't even want to get into that. Go read the Global Children's Health Defense, Robert Kennedy Jr.'s site. Go read the article on it there. There's just so much going on. There's so much toxicity in our environment. That's what we should be talking about. The thing that I just talked about that I cannot name, that's what we should be talking about. I mean, it's unfortunate, but people die, okay? Are we really trying to pretend that we can make people live forever, like in the state that most of these people probably were when they died? Not that they're not people. I'm not trying to discount the value of their lives. They probably had great lives. But do you think if I get wheeled around for the last 6 months of my life in an old folks' home, and I don't even recognize the people around me and I don't know what's going on, I'm not living, and I don't want to live like that. So that's for the record, okay? Sorry. Since the 1970s, however, the scope of public health action has moved beyond hygiene and contagious disease to target self-regarding personal behavior. As Richard A. Epstein explains, the modern public health movement treats any health issue as one of public health so long as it affects large numbers of individuals. This has led to a focus on personal habits, which are risk factors for non-communicable diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Our public health problems are not, strictly speaking, public health questions at all, write Gostin and Gostin. They are questions of individual lifestyle. In this view, public health is the aggregated private health outcomes of the nation, and prevention involves modifying any factors that influence them. Another footnote. To distinguish between the traditional and contemporary public health movements, I will put speech marks around public health when referring to the modern movement that focuses on private, non-collective health risks. Social reformers have been using legislation to clean up the environment since the 19th century, but the use of laws to regulate lifestyles opens up a whole new way of operating for public health. Obesity is now routinely described as a public health epidemic, despite being neither contagious nor a disease. Smoking, drinking, and even gambling have been brought under the umbrella of public health and are also referred to as epidemics, despite having such long histories that they're the very opposite. They are endemic. An epidemic of non-communicable diseases is an oxymoron, but the use of such terms encourages the public to tolerate the same level of state intervention in matters of lifestyle as they would if they were in the midst of a viral outbreak. Or you could just make a viral outbreak and you could tell everybody to change their habits. That would work too. You know, if it's going too slowly and you got to have like control over the world because global warming, blah, blah, blah. Not getting into that. In an article arguing that there is no moral difference between restricting food advertising and evacuating people from the site of a nuclear accident, Harrington et al. Acknowledged that it is largely a question of using the most persuasive rhetoric. this is an excerpt, to counteract the liberty-oriented position, those who favor a more interventionist role for the state have recently argued for labeling obesity as a public health emergency. In this view, while we might accept that the state should ordinarily refrain from interfering with the self-regarding behavior of its citizens, that presumption is much less stringent during a public health emergency. By labeling obesity as public health emergency, policymakers could override concerns about individual liberty in order to pursue more interventionist policies designed to guide consumer choices toward healthier lifestyles. Agenda 2030, Agenda 2030, Agenda 2030, the SDGs, the SDGs, the SDGs. Get rid of alcohol, get rid of cigarettes, get rid of people who say no to vaccination. Just go read it. It's right there. They tell you what they want to do. Same people that are running the show right now. It's the same people that are running the show right now tell you what they want to do. And then you're all like, oh, well, I don't really understand, but I'm just going to trust the people in charge who go 4 times a year to these powwows where they get given expensive swag bags, where they buy all the brainwashing that they're given at the climate conferences, and they talk about we need to do something about population, and we need to do something about the fact that people are too free and they use too many things and they're ruining the environment, they're horrible, they're awful, they're bad. Read the subtext, folks. It's right there under the real text. Since obesity is a slow-growing and irreversible risk factor for some chronic diseases of old age, the authors of this article have to resort to extraordinarily creative arguments to redefine terms such as emergency and imminent harm to make them fit their purpose, while attributing beliefs to John Stuart Mill that he surely did not hold. Like other public health paternalists, they maintain that an individual health risk becomes a matter for the government when many people are involved and when the government could do something about it. The activities in question do not have to be addressed by collective action. Indeed, individual action is often more effective. People should be better. They should take better care. I should be better. It stresses me out that I don't take enough good care of myself. But it's a journey, it's a process, and you can't force people to do things they don't want to do. They have to come to a realization. And if you try this thing that we're doing right now, it's not going to go well. It's not going well. But because they can be addressed by collective action, that is enough to make them suitable targets for government intervention. This widens the scope enormously because almost anything can be affected by government intervention, and almost anything can affect the health of individuals. As Rothstein notes, any list of root causes or social determinants of poor health must include war, famine, crime, poverty, unemployment, income inequality, environmental degradation, lack of economic development, human rights violations, poor education, inadequate housing, lack of natural resources, and unresponsive governments. They're pretty responsive right now. Some public health groups believe that their mission does indeed encompass all of these issues and more. But as Rothstein argues, there is no reason to think that redefining social and economic problems as public health issues makes them any easier to solve. Given that public health officials have limited resources, coercive powers, and no democratic mandate, it makes sense for them to focus on controlling contagious diseases rather than embroiling themselves in a complex and controversial political issue. Complex and controversial political issues that are beyond their immediate field of expertise. I'm going to stop there. No, let me just finish this last part. Sorry. I've already gone almost half an hour, so I wasn't intending to do this. My kids are watching a movie in the basement with my wife, and I'd rather go join them than keep doing this, but I wanted to get this done while it's still light out and it's not too cold, even though I am kind of shivering. Consent. Public health paternalists do not necessarily see themselves as part of a paternalistic tradition. Rather, they see themselves as an outpost of the medical community. They proscribe while doctors prescribe. But there is a crucial difference between a public health activist and a medical practitioner. While medics require the consent of the patient, public health professionals do not ask for consent. and their interventions often contradict the wishes of the people they are, quote, treating. This is a serious ethical problem. As Charlton says, good intentions are not enough when it comes to imposing interventions upon an unconsenting population. I just heard that there's some show that I would never watch, but a coworker told me that it's like The View for Canada. I don't even know what it's called, the Conversation or something like that. But they were discussing a poll that was done where something like 43 or 46% of Canadians find something fishy about all this. I wonder why. Some paternalists have argued that no government policy has the consent of every individual, and so there is no need to expect it the case in public health policies. While it is true that the government does not ask every individual for permission to run the army or build an airport, these are functions that ineluctably require collective action. When public goods are at stake and one size has to fit all, majoritarian democracy is the least bad system. They're doing it for your benefit, folks. We have to change the world in 10 years or we're going to die. It's going to burn up. We're all going to die. Oh, we've been wrong every other time before this for the last 30 years when we've been trying to pull this scam. But we're really sure this time, and there's too many people anyway. Is there too many people? I don't know. Maybe. What are they doing? What are they doing with their time? Is there too many unproductive people? If I was a person who was a very productive, a highly efficient human being, I would probably think there was too many unproductive people and they were sucking off of my teeth too often. That's probably what I would think. But I'm not that person. I'm the kind of person that believes more and more recently in what it is that religion, specifically Christianity, has to offer to us by way of lessons to live by. And that is to say, you have to be accountable for your actions. You have to think about the things you're doing. You cannot just live life walking through thinking it's all just a giant cosmic accident. There has to be some sort of greater good that is not about forcing it down someone's throat. No, it has to be about a philosophical discussion. You have to think about what you think is the right thing that you should be doing in your life at any given time. You have to try to be a better person. And nobody can force someone to try to be a better person. They will reject that. Like a teenager rejects authority from their parents. People reject it when paternalists in government try to tell them what to do, which is why you're seeing a huge portion, almost half the population in Canada at least, saying that this ain't right. A minority will always be unsatisfied with the course of action, and that is unfortunate. But when a nation is required to choose a single path, it is unavoidable. Only one view can prevail. But the mere fact that governments do not require consent when making decisions that have to be made collectively does not justify governments bypassing consent when it comes to decisions that individuals make for themselves. Health is not a public good. People cannot avoid air pollution by setting their own rules, but they can control their intake of sugary drinks. This is a fundamental distinction. When it comes to personal lifestyle decisions, collective action is unnecessary. Everybody can get their own way. Much of the public health literature treats the shift from preventing contagious diseases to regulating private behavior as an inevitable consequence of communicable diseases being largely eradicated in developed countries. With communicable diseases vanquished, they say, non-communicable diseases took their place and became the new challenge for public health officials to fight. Communicable diseases got eradicated in developed countries because of sanitation and nutrition and cleanliness in general and better health and just more durable people. The more you put into building up your health, the more load it can take. The more I go to the gym and exercise, the heavier the weights I can lift. This is not rocket science, okay? You could say that if you give a kid more vaccines, their immune system is going to become like amazingly strong. It's not the vaccines, okay? Well, no, okay. I don't want to It is the vaccines because of what they put in the vaccines. Am I saying that anybody is intentionally putting something in the vaccines to harm someone? I can't say that's... Why would that be true? But we know aluminum is bad. Look it up. There was a documentary, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was all about aluminum toxicity. It is a neurotoxin, okay? They do these tests on these kids, and when they do these tests on these kids or these animals, they always find all kinds of problems. There's a lot of books on it. If you haven't read one, it's just because nobody ever talks about it on your favorite talk show where a bunch of ladies get together and gab together, okay? That's not what they talk about. They don't talk about that because it's not sanctioned. It's not part of the deal. It's not part of the program. But they should, because it's part of the conversation that's never had. And we never have the conversation, so we pretend it doesn't exist. It's not true. Okay? It's a real conversation. People have been having it in the back channels for a long time, and now you're seeing it all over Facebook and wherever else you may congregate in your social media if they don't censor it, and that's bullshit. People should be allowed to have the conversation. Thank God for a guy like Tucker Carlson, who last night in his show, when talking to Alan Dershowitz, he said we should have the conversation. Free speech should be paramount. We should have the conversation, and that's 100% right. You need to. It hasn't been had. It has been off limits, and it hasn't been really that important until now. But now it's the most important thing. So, where was I? The mere fact that governments do not require consent when making decisions that have to be made collectively does not justify governments bypassing consent when it comes to decisions that individuals can make for themselves. Health is not a public good. People cannot avoid air pollution by setting their own rules, but they can control their intake of sugar drinks. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, I read this already. Sorry. He just goes on to make more of his case that these people basically say what they want to do, and now they're doing it. And we're all just like, it's really just a sickness, and we all have to be careful and do what they say and stay home. They want people not driving cars. They want people not taking planes. They want people not eating meat, for fuck's sake. Meat's bad for you. Have you heard that one? Oh, I'm a vegan. I'm like so pro everything, and animals, you shouldn't kill animals because they're real. Look, I'm not into factory farming. I think it's terrible. I think it's tragic. I think people should have to hunt their own food, actually. Maybe not butcher it. That's a skill. But at the least, you should have to take some accountability for what you put into your body. And maybe we could eat less meat, sure. I'm sure there's some people that eat a hamburger, 5 days a week, and I don't. So why does the rules that are meant to stop people like them have to apply? Why do they have to apply to me? And just for that, there's an awful lot of people out there that will tell you that the nutritional information that you get from vegans is, unless they're like top-notch guys that know everything they're talking about, they can really hurt people with their recommendations for just people that are not that interested in spending a lot of time kind of understanding all the things that you have to do, all the supplementation. You can really hurt yourself bad in a way that depletes your immune system, surprisingly enough. And I thought that we need everybody to have a super cherry immune system, otherwise we're all going to die or something. So, that's a long art. Read The Big Fat Surprise. I'm going to leave it there, but it's what they want to do, folks. And they have an opportunity. Am I saying they're in on something that's some big conspiracy? No, not even. I'm saying an awful lot of people are getting what they want out of this, and so they are doing it. Never let a crisis go to waste. That's what they're doing. And we're all just sitting back and letting it happen because we feel guilty or something. I don't understand it. Anyway, take care.